Welcome, Shadow Seekers, to American Shadows, Crimes and Chronicles. Today, we're unearthing a tale that'll haunt your thoughts long after it ends. Whether you're glued to the screen or just listening in, you're in for a wild ride through history's darkest corners. If you're new, hit subscribe to join our mission of exposing America's hidden truths. Regulars, your likes fuel our journey into the unknown. Now, let's peel back the layers of time and reveal the secrets beneath. Ready? Let's begin. 43 dead, 1,300 rebels. The Attica Uprising's untold story. Hello, friends, and welcome to American Shadows, Crimes and Chronicles. Today we're traveling back to September 9th, 1971, a day that would ignite one of the most significant prison uprisings in U.S. history. Over the next 5 days, the Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York would become the epicenter of a struggle that laid bare the deep-seated issues plaguing America's prison system and society at large. What transforms a maximum security prison into a battleground for civil rights? How does a demand for basic human dignity escalate into a blood-soaked tragedy? And why, more than half a century later, does the name Attica still resonate as a rallying cry for prison reform and a cautionary tale of state power? Before we dive into the events of those fateful September days, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you who support our work. Your likes, comments, and shares help us bring these shadowy corners of history to light. Your engagement fuels our passion for uncovering the stories that have shaped our nation, and we're truly grateful for each and every one of you. The Powder Keg: Conditions leading up to the riot. To understand the powder keg that was Attica, we need to step back and look at the America of 1971. The country was in the throes of social upheaval. The civil rights movement had made significant strides, but racial tensions remained high. The Vietnam War raged on, sparking widespread protests, and a new awareness of prisoners' rights was emerging, part of a broader push for social justice. Attica Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison built in the 1930s, was a world unto itself. Designed to hold 1,600 inmates, by 1971, it was housing 2,250 men, with Black and Puerto Rican prisoners making up about 70% of the population. In stark contrast, the guards were almost exclusively white, many harboring racist attitudes towards the inmates. This racial disparity was a powder keg waiting to explode. Conditions inside Attica were deplorable. Prisoners faced dehumanizing conditions, poor medical care, starvation-level food rations, and almost no opportunities for education or rehabilitation. They were confined to their cells for 14 to 16 hours a day, allowed one shower per week and one roll of toilet paper per month. They worked for wages as low as 6 cents a day. Requests for basic rights were routinely ignored, and tensions between inmates and guards simmered for years. Adding fuel to this volatile mix was the broader political atmosphere. Many inmates had been inspired by the civil rights movement and Black Power movements, becoming increasingly aware of their civil rights, rights they believed were being denied in prison. The recent death of George Jackson, a political activist and inmate shot at San Quentin Prison in August 1971, had further inflamed tensions. September 9th, 1971. The uprising begins. On the morning of September 9th, what began as a skirmish between a few inmates and guards in cell block D quickly spiraled into a full-scale rebellion. Within hours, nearly 1,300 prisoners had taken control of the prison, holding 42 staff members hostage. The prisoners quickly organized themselves, electing a leadership council and outlining their demands. They called for better conditions, legal representation, and protection from retaliation. But perhaps most importantly, they demanded to be treated as human beings. As word of the uprising spread, supporters gathered outside the prison walls. Civil rights leaders, journalists, and observers were invited in to witness conditions and help negotiate. The prisoners, aware of the power of media, made sure their story was being told to the outside world. September 9th to 12th, negotiations and standoff. For 4 days, the world watched as negotiations unfolded. The prisoners, led by 21-year-old Elliot James L.D. Barkley, articulated their demands with a clarity and conviction that captivated many observers. "We are men," Barkley declared. "We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be beaten or driven as such." Among the outside observers invited to negotiate were civil rights lawyer William Kunstler, Black Panther leader Bobby Seale, and various state officials. The prisoners' demands were clear. They wanted dignity, justice, and reforms to the inhumane conditions they had been subjected to for years. But behind the scenes, state officials, led by Governor Nelson Rockefeller, were losing patience. Rockefeller, with an eye on national politics, refused to visit the prison personally, a decision that would be heavily criticized later. Instead, he viewed the rebellion as a direct challenge to the state's authority and began to consider a more forceful response. September 13th, the retaking of Attica. By September 13th, negotiations had stalled. Governor Rockefeller authorized a military-style assault on the prison, sending in hundreds of state troopers and National Guardsmen armed with tear gas, rifles, and shotguns. At 9:46 a.m., after issuing an ultimatum that was misconveyed to the prisoners, state police launched their attack. In a brutal assault that lasted less than 15 minutes, they fired over 2,000 rounds of ammunition into the prison yard. The official death toll stood at 43. 33 inmates and 10 hostages, all killed by law enforcement gunfire. The aftermath was as brutal as the assault. Prisoners were stripped, beaten, and forced to crawl through the mud. Some were tortured or subjected to mock executions. The state's narrative, initially accepted by much of the media, painted the prisoners as violent animals who had slit the throats of hostages. This was later proven false, but the damage to public perception had been done. The legacy of Attica. A turning point in prison reform. The Attica Prison riot sent shockwaves across the country. It exposed the inhumanity of the American prison system and raised awareness about the treatment of prisoners, highlighting the racial and social inequalities within the justice system. In the years that followed, Attica became a symbol of both the need for prison reform and the state's willingness to use overwhelming force to maintain control. The McKay Commission, tasked with investigating the riot, concluded that the assault was a major mistake, and the death toll was the bloodiest encounter between Americans since the Civil War. While some reforms were implemented, including improvements in prison conditions and greater access to education and medical care for inmates, many of the deeper issues of racial inequality and mass incarceration continued to fester in the American criminal justice system. The legal aftermath of Attica dragged on for decades. In 2000, almost 30 years after the uprising, the state of New York agreed to pay $8 million to the surviving inmates and families of those killed. In 2005, the Forgotten Victims of Attica, an organization representing the slain and injured prison employees and their families, secured a $12 million settlement from the state. As we reflect on the Attica Uprising, we're confronted with difficult questions about justice, human rights, and the use of state power. How far have we really come in addressing the issues that led to Attica? Are our prisons today truly centers of rehabilitation, or do they still prioritize punishment over reform? And how do we balance the need for public safety with the fundamental human rights of the incarcerated? This is American Shadows, where we peer into the darker corners of our nation's past. Until next time, remember that history isn't just a collection of dates and names. It's a living force that shapes our world in ways both seen and unseen. The echoes of Attica continue to resonate today, reminding us of the ongoing struggle for justice and human dignity within our prison systems and society at large. As we go about our daily lives, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons of Attica. For in understanding our past, we gain the wisdom to shape a more just and equitable future. The shadows cast by those 5 days in September 1971 are long indeed, and we ignore them at our peril.